You ever wonder how modern leaders become these larger-than-life figures? Is it just pure charisma, destiny, or is it something else? Something more like a process, a system, even a machine? Well, today we're digging into a really fascinating study that argues it's the machine, and that a lot of what we see in modern politics is actually manufactured.
So, the study we're exploring, The Machine of Myth, says that right now, our public conversation is kind of stuck between these two extremes. On one side, you've got total devotion, right? The leader can do no wrong. And on the other, you've got this reactive opposition, where outrage is the only setting. And the study argues that even though these two sides feel like polar opposites, they have one big thing in common. They both stop us from really understanding how power actually works.
So what if we could just step back from that whole cycle of praise and anger? What if, instead of trying to judge the person, we could actually analyze the process? That's the big challenge this study is throwing out there. And just to be super clear here, we aren't presenting our own theory today. What we're doing is breaking down the framework from this one specific analysis. We're going to use its ideas and its language to explore a totally new way of seeing modern leadership.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to talk about moving beyond that cycle of worship or rage. Then, we'll get into the wild idea of a manufactured leader and look at the anatomy of that machine. After that, we'll examine the paradoxes of power this all creates, and we'll wrap up with the really big questions this analysis forces us to ask.
All right, let's dive right in. This first section really sets the stage for a completely different kind of political analysis.
You know the author is really upfront about the goal here. This is not a biography trying to dig up personal secrets, and it's not just some political hit piece. No, it's framed as a forensic study. It's an examination of the systems, the structures, and all the incentives that build and hold up a particular kind of power.
And that right there, that is the fundamental shift. The analysis just completely moves away from a moral judgment and zooms in on a structural investigation. It's less about asking, so who is this person, and much more about asking, okay, how does this thing actually work?
All right, let's get to the core thesis of this whole thing. The idea that modern leaders are products, not just people.
This is such a powerful idea. It's saying a leader doesn't just rise to the top on their own, they are assembled. They're put together where all these powerful forces meet. Ideology basically writes the script. Technology gives them the megaphone, and all that public anxiety and longing, well, that provides the audience.
And a huge tool in this assembly process is myth. He argues we should stop seeing myth as just some false story. Instead, we should see it as a piece of political technology. You know, those stories about a leader's humble beginnings or their unwavering strength. They're engineered to turn a human politician into this powerful, untouchable symbol.
Okay, so how on earth do you actually study something like this? It sounds huge, right? Well, the author proposes a really specific method for taking this whole manufacturing process apart. The analysis is built on 4 core principles. First, absence is evidence, meaning what isn't said or done is a choice, and it matters. Second, focus on systems over intentions. So analyze the machine, not just what you think the operator wants. Third, humanize, don't demonize, because understanding the person inside the system helps you understand the system itself. And fourth, view democracy as a discipline, something citizens have to constantly practice. Let's dig into that first one a little more.
This is so interesting. The study argues that what a leader doesn't do is just as important as what they do. You know, those gaps in the official biography, the total radio silence during a huge crisis, the lack of any real, unscripted moments with the press. These aren't seen as accidents. They're treated as deliberate design choices, as meaningful political facts that help protect the leader from normal accountability.
So when you start analyzing things this way, it reveals this huge paradox at the center of it all. A contradiction the study claims is built right into this leadership manufacturing process.
So here's the first half of the paradox. On one hand, an image of just incredible, unshakable strength is projected out to the world. But according to this analysis, that image is totally reliant on, well, the complete opposite: silence, incredibly tight message control, and a bubble of narrative insulation.
And the second part of the paradox builds right on top of that. The promise is often one of democratic renewal, of making things great again. But the study argues that the actual result of a system that puts a leader beyond question is often the weakening of the very democratic institutions that are supposed to keep them in check, like a free press or an independent judiciary.
So here's the kicker. The really crucial point is this. The study claims these paradoxes aren't mistakes. They're not bugs in the system. They are the logical, predictable outcomes. They are features of how this machine is designed to work.
Okay, let's bring this all home. Why does any of this analysis actually matter? Why go through all this trouble to deconstruct leadership?
Because, as the author states, this analysis isn't ultimately about just one person. It's about a model of politics, a blueprint that can be picked up and used again anywhere in the world by anyone who wants to build power in this specific way. The whole point is to learn to recognize the pattern.
And this quote, wow, it really gets to the very heart of the study's mission. It frames this whole act of analysis not as an attack, but as a necessary act of democratic maintenance. It's about bringing a leader back down to a human scale, where they can actually be held accountable.
In the end, the argument here is that history's judgment doesn't really care about popularity polls or the size of your rallies. It cares about what a society gets used to. What standards of truth, of accountability, of debate, what becomes normal under a certain kind of leadership.
You know, the study concludes that its real goal isn't to convince everyone to agree with it, it's to introduce a set of questions into our public conversation that are simply too important to ignore. So after walking through this framework of how power can be manufactured, the only question left is, what questions does it make unavoidable for you?